out here as well. We're excited to get started, and we'll kick off with introductions. So we call it, we'll introduce ourselves a little bit and Rollins Pass, but Rollins Pass has a few other names: Corona Pass, Boulder Pass, Rollinsville Pass. So if you know it by any of these other names, you are in the right place. So in terms of introductions, let's introduce where Rollins Pass is and why it's us up here speaking about it rather than someone else. We'll also kind of kick off some recurring themes that you'll see throughout this presentation on Rollins Pass. The first theme is that Rollins Pass is a great gate. So the historian Marshall Sprague wrote in his book, Great Gates, basically that mountain passes are great gates that funnel humans and animals from one side to the other. And you'll really see that come into play in a few slides. Another theme that you'll see is reversals of fortune. There's so many times with the Rollins Pass story where fortunes are won and then lost, or lost and then won, where cities or towns are destroyed or created and then destroyed. So you'll see a lot of reversals of fortunes. And then finally, an enduring tapestry. You know, Steamboat Springs has a connection to Rollins Pass because of the Crawfords coming over. And many people reach out to us to share their own family pictures and stories. So this is more than just history that doesn't apply. This is woven into the fabric of our everyday lives for many of us. So where is Rollins Pass? So Rollins Pass is located on the Continental Divide. Steamboat Springs is over here. I'm not tall enough, but up in the top left. Basically equidistant to between Winter Park Resort and Rollinsville or the Boulder area. Rollins Pass is more or less loosely defined by these geographic boundaries. And it has a 10,000-year history. So first, you have a really expansive Native American presence stretching all over the components of the pass. And they were there because they were hunting big game animals from east to west and from west to east. Then in the 1800s, late 1800s, John Quincy Adams Rollins built his toll wagon road over Rollins Pass. And that's more or less the route that it took. In 1903, 1904, they built a railroad over Rollins Pass, over the Continental Divide. It was obviously very inefficient. That's the route it took. They decided to make it a little bit more efficient. They built the Moffat Tunnel, a straight shot from East Portal to West Portal, a little easier. And then in the mid-1950s, they removed the rails in the 30s and opened portions of the pass, sometimes the complete pass, sometimes not, to the automobile. And those are the routes that are available today. And then about 30, 40 years ago, there is now a natural gas pipeline that's stretched across the pass. So I'm still building this slide out, but you can really begin to see how a mountain pass can be a great gate, funneling humans and animals from one side to the other. And there's also an aviation component. So there's an en route airway radial that stretches right over the summit of Rollins Pass. And because that's 4 nautical miles on either side, it really looks like this. So definitely a great gate.
So there were a lot of towns on that slide. Just to give you a sense of the scale, I wanted to walk through. If you follow an arrow roughly here, we're just going to follow through on the next couple of slides. So that arrow roughly comes to here. This is looking at, kind of your looking direction to Corona at the summit, looking at the twin trestles here. Just for scale, Travis did some photoshopping. You can kind of see down in the trees here, we put in the Statue of Liberty. And then we put in the Empire State Building, just so you can see, how large this cliffside is. Again, following that arrow through, roughly to this boulder overlooking Yankee Doodle. We drove from the Rollinsville side and went for a nice little hike over by Yankee Doodle. And I walked up to, looking up at that point, that same point, following it through. Wanted to go explore that waterfall with my trusty dog, Swiffer. Travis is a certified drone pilot. So we brought the drone out, and he went up and out just a couple hundred feet, and you can see really how quickly I disappear into the distance. Just to give you a sense of the scale of Rollins Pass, it really is a huge area. And for us, Rollins Pass is home. This is our photograph. Most of these photographs are. Oh, you're fine. Come on in. Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't warn you about that. Thought I had a longer cord. Sorry about that. So we're hikers, photographers, and really just the beauty of the place. Rollins Pass is where we call home in the summer and get up there when we can in the winter. It's also where Travis proposed to me at Heart Lake. It's where we were married. And it's where we celebrate special occasions like our dog Swiffer Rollins Wright's birthday. We're crazy dog people. Just a little bit more about us. When we're not working on Rollins Pass, I'm a mobile app engagement expert. I work in product marketing for a company that builds mobile apps for healthcare. Travis is an IT strategy expert and chief strategy officer. We're also dual degree graduates from the University of Denver. And we do a couple other fun things as well.
So in my spare time, I also am on the board of directors for the Grand County Historical Association. I'm focused on issues related to technology and preservation. And I work to ensure that the museum's digital collection of incredible photographs is continually saved to the cloud, so that if anything happens to the museum, we're fine with our photographic collection. And I'm also on the Historic Preservation Advisory Commission for Gilpin County. We report to the Board of County Commissioners and make recommendations on creating historic districts, stay of demolition, reviews, preservation issues, so much more. And we're also adopters of a trail on Rollins Pass, a small, almost 2-mile trail. We've adopted it from the U.S. Forest Service and with the Headwaters Trail Alliance. We've also made discoveries on Rollins Pass. So this is a rail car that's been overturned. I'll give you an animation of what it, if that helps a bit. So that long piece of wood is the length of the rail car, or most of it. So it came down slope and basically crumbled away, but we had located this. And it's associated with 4 sets of gorgeous 1-ton train wheels. Kate and I did quite a bit of research. You can see the serial numbers here. On the outside of the wheel, there's all sorts of maker's marks and dates and all sorts of other markings. So we dumped all of this into Microsoft Excel, just trying to find commonalities, really thoroughly documenting this. Took detailed measurements, trying to find schematics of what this rail car may have looked like. Wrote preliminary papers, and found old Forest Service papers where they discovered the wheels, but they didn't make the connection to the rail car upslope because it was so camouflaged. And ultimately cooperated with Colorado State University's archaeology students to document this wreck as Wright's Wheels and Wright's Wreck, named after us, on Rollins Pass. So there's all sorts of artifacts up there, and that's us when we were on that expedition with Colorado State University students. So that paper was actually presented at the 71st Annual Plains Anthropological Conference in Loveland, Colorado. We also volunteered with the U.S. Forest Service Passport in Time project on Rollins Pass a couple summers ago. We were documenting 10,000 years of history, all the way to present day on Rollins Pass. And we also like to engage, this is kind of what Katie was touching on earlier, in photographic archaeology. There's so much to be uncovered with these photos, depending on if you move backwards through time or forwards through time. So this is 1948, this is the summit of Rollins Pass. And there's not much to see here, but if we roll that clock backwards, suddenly there's quite a bit. There's sheep here. These are important. Remember these sheep. There's a train actually at the end of this Y. Large snow shed, basically stretching the entire width of this image, and dining hall. It's now just a foundation, but this really aids when you're out in the field to have these old photographs to really unlock the mysteries of where things might have been and what they looked like. That also works moving forward as well. So this is Jenny Lake on the east side of Rollins Pass in 1904. There's quite a few cabins hidden in the trees here. If we roll forward about 108 years, there's nothing. There's just tents. So we really lose history, and that's why these photographs are really important to piecing together the mysteries of what happened. And as it goes, the better the photographs are, the more you can learn from them. So this is kind of an iconic image of trains ascending a trestle on Rollins Pass. This is used pretty much everywhere that Rollins Pass is discussed. But the quality isn't that good. This comes from a newspaper article. There's a lot of halftone dots. The quality just isn't good. So we found a better one at the Grand County Historical Association. A little bit wider, we can get a bit more detail. There's actually a tunnel under this trestle we'll talk about later. And we're beginning to see the portal of that tunnel. But Kate and I were wondering, is there a better quality image? And we hadn't found one until an estate sale where these were almost lost to history. And the original photograph looks like this. And so these photographs are exceptional because we now get details of telegraph poles over here, much more details with that portal and fencing, so much up there. So what do you do when you have photos from an estate sale and make discoveries and work with U.S. Forest Service archaeology and Colorado State University archaeology? Well, you write a book. And that's what we did. We spent 18 months of our lives writing this book.
And we certainly didn't write this book in a vacuum. If you were here earlier, you saw the rolling video that we have, just kind of thanking all the individuals and organizations that have helped us in the production of this book. Just condensing it down here. It's a tough one to read, but you can see that we worked with a lot of museums really across the country, larger organizations, National Geodetic Survey, even the National Avalanche Center. So we really tried to speak with as many experts across every area that touches on Rollins Pass. With our book, we also went out with a bang and had a really large book launch. We had it at the Alamo in Littleton. That will make sense in a second why we had it there. We had about 200 people, a little over 200 people in attendance. Fire Marshal got a little cranky with us. And we had folks who came, from all over. We had folks from Netherlands and also from the Netherlands. So people flew internationally to come and see us, and it was just incredible. And really, they didn't come for us. I mean, they did, but they came because we were showing a rare screening of the White Desert. It was a 1925 silent film that was produced on Rollins Pass. So we were able to get the only copy of that exists in the world, and we screened that in the movie theater. It was very cool. We were in Denver getting calls from Travis's mom that we had made the front page of the news in our local paper, so that was very cool to see. And then, as I mentioned, we're on Rollins Pass all the time, so when we're not hiking, you'll probably see us in our truck talking with people, sharing the history of the area, selling some books and autographs.
So I wanted to speak for a few minutes about the cover of our book. We get a couple questions about it. The first one is that man fishing with an umbrella? And the answer is yes. We like the ingenuity of it, and there's so much ingenuity with the entire Rollins Pass story in terms of you have folks taking, deciding to go from east to west with wagons, or deciding to go east or west with trains, attaching trestles to very steep cliff sides. So there was just a lot of ingenuity that went along with Rollins Pass. And then we liked the story that is recreation. No matter the time period, people love to just take a moment at a mountain lake with great views and enjoy themselves. We didn't choose any from the rail era for our cover, although this is contemporaneous for this picture. There are some contentious tunnels on Rollins Pass. We talk about them just briefly in this slide deck. But really, when you look at the total acreage of Rollins Pass, it's 0.02% is a contentious tunnel, so it's not part of the 10,000-year story for us. And rails were active on Rollins Pass just for a small percentage of time, especially when you condense that into 10,000 years. And in fact, if you were to condense 10,000 years into just a 24-hour period, the rails first appeared just about 18 minutes before midnight and were pulled up about 10 minutes before midnight. So, our question here that we're trying to solve today is what happened earlier that evening and earlier that afternoon and that morning. And that's what we'll get into here with our Rollins Pass Rewind. So, we noticed when people hold our book and they flip through it, they're flipping generally from back to front. And because our book is in chronological order, they're actually traveling backwards through time. So we decided to do the same thing with our slide deck today. And there's a lot of perspective that can be gained just by stepping out from a particular picture. So, this particular mountain, it was close, now it's far, we get a lot more context, and that's what happens when we adjust the time scale as well. And this is a really great quote, especially the bolded part, but it's really important that the history that we're about to talk about is not the history of strangers. This is our story had we been born a little bit earlier. Had we been in the age of the Crawfords, we would have been on the wagons to Steamboat, and so on.
So before we go backwards in time, let's start with present day. For those who maybe went to Rollins Pass a long time ago, you might be surprised by these photos. This is really a standard day on any weekend on Rollins Pass today, just the amount of cars and visitation. It's really increased over the last decade, and it was one of the reasons that we wanted to write this book, seeing increased visitation and kind of how it was treated today. We wanted to get more information out there about its historical significance. With the increased visitation, people come up there to, hike and fish and even ski the glaciers. So we see increased usage of search and rescue on Rollins Pass. This team was here to help some skiers who were injured on Skyscraper. We also see a lot of folks, not treating wilderness the way wilderness should be treated. You can see the truck is parked in wilderness past the parking lot. These tracks here on the right is the Continental Divide Trail, so obviously non-motorized route. So it's unfortunate to see that. Continuing on the theme of steel and gasoline, this starts us in the first chapter of our rewind. So 1956 to 1990, this route was open as a thoroughfare. You could drive from Rollinsville outside of Boulder to Winter Park. The road is not great. The road is really not great today. And this is pretty much what you'd expect over the whole 20 plus miles. It's very narrow as well. Passing opportunities are few and far between. This is from our truck dash cam on Giant's Ladder. You can just see how narrow it is. The erosion in the foreground there doesn't really help matters. So why did this end in 1990? There was an accident at Needles Eye Tunnel. Assistant Fire Chief Tom Abbott was actually on a tour. So he was at Needles Eye Tunnel with a tour run by Home James. The company still in existence out of Winter Park. And there was a partial collapse, resulted in him being helicoptered out and a below-knee amputation. So this is a reversal of fortune. This theme continues, and it's particularly true for Needles Eye Tunnel. With that accident in 1990, it was actually, that area was only open for a year since its reopening in 1989. It was closed in years prior because of another partial collapse that resulted in some engineering studies, a lot of work was put in, and the collapse in 1979 was actually in the same place of the partial collapse that injured Mr. Abbott. This is a look at Needles Eye Tunnel in 1974, kind of before all that repair work was put in place, and just some photos from the time here. You can see by the haircuts and the style, it's from the 70s. People just enjoying the road. There were these points of interest signs along that route. These are old railroad ties, and there was a pamphlet that you could follow to see what those points of interest were. Read a little bit more about the area. Some more pictures from the time showing those. This is one of the twin trestles. So you can see on opening day, 1956, a vehicle is about to drive over that trestle. If you remember the photo before that had the Empire Building Statue of Liberty, that's the trestle that they're driving over. So that cliffside is about what they're to come onto.
So as we drift further backwards into time, we're now getting into 1956 all the way back to 1928. And this is a chapter in our book that we call Disregarded and Overlooked. Perhaps more appropriately, it should be, instead of overlooked, it should be overflown. This is the area of time when aviation really began to take off, no pun intended, with Rollins. You can see here, it's very small, we'll zoom in here in a moment, but there's a concrete pad at the top of the mountain. And we'll take a closer look at this. So this concrete pad has a lot of mysteries, a lot of misnomers as well. So I worked with an aviation archaeologist to help piece together what this is. He sent me a photo. This is from Wyoming, but there was a shed atop that concrete pad, and it housed dual generators that powered a rotating airway beacon that was used for aviation purposes. On old U.S. Geological Survey maps, it's indicated here as radio beacon. There was actually no radio component to it. It was just rotating lights, rotating and flashing lights. The aviation archaeologist, Thomas, sent me all sorts of information. We won't go into all of this today, but suffice it to say he was a fountain of knowledge on this topic. And it's indicated here as Beacon 82. The FAA likes to drop at least one or maybe more zeros, so it's actually 820 miles away from Los Angeles, hence Beacon 82. And it's indicated with a star on the map, meaning something is rotating there. At the top of the peak, even higher, there's not much higher there than that concrete pad, but there is slightly. There are 4 leg stubs, 3 of which are circled here, but those leg stubs held a lattice tower, and on top of that tower was that rotating light. That rotating light is still in existence. It is actually in storage in Hot Sulphur Springs at the Pioneer Village Museum. You can go there and mention that I said you can go see it. It's actually quite rare because not many beacons were glass domed. A few of them were, but and the one on top, Rollins Pass, definitely was. There were also quite a few aviation wrecks on Rollins Pass, especially because of that en route airway radio. There was one that happened in 1966 of a de Havilland Dove. Crashed, it just barely missed clearing the top of that slope and crashed. They pulled it up, but there's actually a tire, at least we believe it's a tire. It's only, it's covered by snow about 48 or 49 weeks out of the year, so we're waiting until late September, hopefully, to go confirm that that is a tire, but it's the one piece they didn't recover of that plane. There's also other mysteries up there. There is a fence on the west side of Rollins Pass, and we documented this with the U.S. Forest Service Passport in Time. We took lots of photos, lots of GPS points, but kind of wondered, what is this fence, and why is it made of railroad ties? Interestingly, aviation will actually solve this mystery. In 1946, the U.S. Forest Service conducted flyovers of many parts of Colorado and the nation, but this one is of Rollins Pass. And down here, and I'll zoom in there, so this hasn't been photoshopped. This is that fence. It's actually a complete square. And if you remember those sheep from earlier, those sheep were doing quite a bit of damage to the tundra. So they wanted to run an experiment of blocking off a section of tundra to see what would happen if sheep didn't go there. So that's why they created this fence. And if we look further back, 1938, it doesn't exist there. So, using photographs again as a good tool for archaeology, it must have been created sometime in between 38 and 1946. So why was it made of railroad ties? Well, in 1935, the railroad that had the tracks over Rollins Pass petitioned the Interstate Commerce Commission. The ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission, is now defunct. It's been replaced by the Surface Transportation Board, but they basically said, can we remove our rails? They replied rather quickly, basically saying that it's an undue burden to send trains up and over the Continental Divide. Go ahead and remove them. So that's why there was surplus rails to make a fence, or ties to make a fence. And of course, that was because of the Moffett Tunnel in 1928 that had first opened. We won't go through all of this, but there's the roundabout way on Rollins Pass or the shortcut through the tunnel. Some newspaper articles indicate delays of up to 60 days to go over Rollins Pass. When you shorten that to 12 minutes, that's why they replied really quickly, you can remove those rails. And interestingly enough, the Moffett Tunnel was crucial to winning World War II. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And just so many issues that no longer experienced because of the Moffett Tunnel. So these are some of the photos of construction of the Moffett Tunnel. Newspapers were pretty blunt in the time. It speaks for itself. Another one as well. It will remain a failure if you send trains over Rollins Pass.
Oh, come on in. Just watch the cord if you come in.
We went down the wrong hall.
Oh, you're fine. Come on in. Just watch the cord here.
And of course, newspapers didn't hide their feelings when the tunnel was first opened in February of 1928. It goes without regrets. That's pretty strong wording there. Newspaper articles also talk about that lengthy route over Rollins Pass that we showed earlier. That's actually 30 complete circles. That's 10,800 degrees of curvature, replaced with just that straight shot. So obviously the efficiencies speak for itself. So in terms of World War II, it was good that this was in place by 1928, so that when we moved into the 40s for World War II, it was there. So there were 30 defense trains per day that went through the Continental Divide using the Moffett Tunnel. Sentries were posted in housing that still exists today in Gilpin County. And there's all sorts of wonderful stories about young women who would throw kisses to servicemen who were riding through on the trains before entering the tunnel. And Steamboat pilot from a long time ago. Kind of a little known fact about the Moffett Tunnel is that the 1922 law that authorized the creation of that tunnel specified that it should be used for automobile traffic, either through a ferry or directly, as well as rail traffic. It hasn't been used as an automobile ferry yet, but this is not an unknown idea. They do this in Europe, and it would be a really neat way to get to Winter Park, and vice versa, if there was such a ferry.
So then, of course, as we continue rewinding before the Moffett Tunnel, of course, there were the rails over the Continental Divide. So Iron and Steam is the next chapter here. Couldn't really start this era without talking about David Moffett, the man who really was behind the drive. He was the driver behind this entire creation of the route over the Continental Divide. He was recognized with a cup, and this cup is actually much larger than the Stanley Cup. We know someone who's seen it in person and is trying to bring it to Denver, so watch headlines for that, might be coming soon. But the road from Denver to Craig was known as the Moffett Road. There are a lot of photographs that we'll get into here that show what it was like, but there are also some photographs that don't exist. This article really stands out to us of a picture of a rainbow over Yankee Doodle. We haven't seen that photograph, but it would be beautiful to see. So let's get into the photos from the time. Travis mentioned John Trezise with the perfect photograph of the train over the trestle rifle sight notch. There were hundreds of photographs in his collection that ultimately went to an estate sale and found its way to us, and we'll share some of those photographs here. This is one of our favorites, and the lighting's a bit tough, but there are two men on the train. You can just kind of see he's leaning out. Again, this is the same trestle on that cliffside, so they're leaning out the train, looking down that cliff. Not really sure where the photographer was standing, though, to be honest. Yeah. There is a little rock thing that he must have been standing on. So again, that's the view from below on that same trestle. More photographs. Most of them are from winter. So these are snow sheds at the summit of Corona. You can just see how tall they were and how large they were. This is a rotary on the front of the train here, so it would make its way through 40-foot snowdrifts. Pretty slow going, but in the White Desert, there's footage of it, making its way through with that rotary, and it's just incredible to see. This is the dining hall at Corona. It's typically the front, this picture, that has the beautiful, white shutters and just that really grand front. This is the back, and we just thought that was very cool to see. It's not pictured very often. The men had a sense of humor. So obviously the outhouse was out of service for winter. And then we just want to share some photos here of the men working together. You can just imagine the camaraderie that they had, spending weeks at a time when they're stranded. And of course, they didn't have Columbia and all the nice, winter weather gear that we have today. So you can just imagine how cold they were. In their diaries, most of them write about the wind, actually, over the cold as being, the most challenging struggle for them. We just love these old photos. So we're asked a lot, what were the trains carrying? And really they were carrying everything, from lumber and materials and stone, even animals, chickens, cows, food of all kinds. They're also carrying tourists. So this route was advertised as being your route to the top of the world, the crown of the world, or Corona. There were a lot of headlines in all the newspapers at the time. People would come from Chicago, New York, all over to take this beautiful route over the Continental Divide. A lot of photo stops for the tourists. As far as the enduring tapestry, this is actually a great example of that. We had someone reach out to us and share their family photo with us. So this is one that was sent to us and shared as being part of their history that they wanted to share with us. On the train. First off-road ATV tours. And then, of course, a lot of photos of large groups of people. We probably have, a couple dozen variations of a photo like this. And they'd have fun, too. I just love seeing the women in their dresses and playing in the snow. It's great. There were a lot of souvenirs, too. This is something that was common of the times, where you could collect silver spoons that were engraved or embossed with sketches of the area. So on the spoon itself is Yankee Doodle, and it kind of covers all the eras that we will talk to in a little bit here, with the timber, horse and wagon, and of course Native American. So the White Desert, this is actually the cast and crew when they were filming the White Desert. The actress Claire Windsor, story goes, she was the only one who came prepared, had snowshoes and all of the winter mittens and hats and everything she needed. No one else knew what they were getting into, I don't think. So it was technically a B movie, is how it was classified, but it really does have, A+ footage. We have permission to share this little bit here. Snowbound in June was a unique experience of a party of 75 tourists from Chicago. I love this article because you don't really need a photograph to envision what it was like as they danced the night away to the music of a phonograph in a log cabin. It just sounds so sweet. So early Photoshop days, before Travis was putting the Statue of Liberty and Empire State Building in photographs, there was a famous photographer by the name of McClure. He has done a lot of work on photographing Rollins Pass in this time frame, and he did quite a bit of photo editing. You can see, just comparing the photographs here, the left is what we know to be manufactured, the right is a more accurate view. We don't believe these sidewalks were here. Obviously the mountain range was put in behind. Again here, kind of similar, on the left has been edited, on the right is what it looks like.
So then there are photos that we're glad we don't have. There are quite a few pretty depressing newspaper articles about accidents. During the creation of Needles Eye Tunnel, 60 Swedes were carried out in baskets when a premature charge of powder exploded. Good, there's no pictures of this. There was a avalanche that pushed a train over the mountainside, and one of the engineers was scalded about the face so badly that the bones of his face were exposed. So there's a lot of sad stories when researching this topic. And speaking of rail wrecks, there's at least 40 that we've been able to document out of historic newspapers. We've actually done pretty good due diligence with citations, and we placed this on a public resource on Wikipedia just to help educate folks as to what years all of this may have happened for various wrecks. And you have workers who basically state that this was probably the most dangerous stretch of railroad in the United States, if not the world. And it's pretty obvious why. So there are quite a few towns and settlements of Rollins Pass that experienced those reversals of fortune that we were speaking of. This is a cabin at Idlewild that's no longer there, and there were many other towns as well on the pass that have just basically been lost to history. Kate and I had the honor of going to Ladora. That's on the east side of Rollins Pass. It's on private property, but we had permission to go with the owner. And he is a descendant of the loggers and sawmills who worked at the town of Ladora. So it was really neat to go through these cabin foundations with someone who actually has that really close personal connection. There's so many others that have just disappeared. Then there are pictures that you actually need to do quite a bit of research on in order to make sense of them. So there is a headstone at the town of Arrow that says R.M. Smith with the dates that he was alive and that he died. But there's nothing else on that tombstone, nothing else to indicate who he was or what he did. So a lot of newspaper research. His obituary says that he was a man of unusual intelligence. But perhaps more importantly, he was a captain in the Union Army during the Civil War. And it's really neat to see the dates on his tombstone and see that they do coincide with the Civil War and know that, you know, he was a contemporary with Abraham Lincoln. It's just really neat history that's up there. And there's other ways that we can look at photographs. This is another flyover from the Forest Service in the 40s. This is of rifle sight notch loop. So this is that trestle. It's obviously very hard to see here, but that train made a loop around this mountainside. But there's other ways to look at pictures, and that's using ICC maps. So the Interstate Commerce Commission that we talked about, they did very detailed maps that were 20 feet long, 3.5 feet tall, made of linen. And these maps have exquisite detail in terms of where telephone boxes are, where telegraph poles were, where a snow shed started and stopped. So it's just another view that we can look at to understand history. And another way to look at it too is through US Geological Survey maps. So this is that same area, but what's interesting here, diagonally, and they probably did not know this at the time, there's a fault line that runs right under the rifle sight notch trestle, and that explains this reversal of fortune for this tunnel. So this is from the railroad era. The train had just exited the tunnel and is moving uphill. You can see that trestle that we showed earlier. There's the tunnel. But in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that tunnel began to collapse because of that fault line. And nowadays it's completely filled in. And you never know that there was a tunnel if no one told you so. Pretty interesting way of looking at things. So in terms of naming Rollins Pass, you've seen a few photos where it mentions Corona Pass. How do you weigh these names? Do you cut all the newspapers up and put them in a bowl for one and a bowl for the other and determine it by weight? No. Quite a bit of legwork went into this. So there's only one official name recognized by the U.S. Geological Survey, as well as the Board on Geographic Names. There's only one name listed in the correct orthography of geographic names, and we don't call it Climax Pass or Fur Pass, and we don't call it Corona Pass. In fact, it's Rollins Pass, and the decision card issued in 1904 states that that is the name. So that's the legwork we went through in determining should our book be called Rollins Pass or Corona Pass. So all sorts of artifacts as well. This is from our time with the U.S. Forest Service archaeology, but incredibly small details that we're looking for, small buttons. And they have really handy guides to determine time periods. Definitely which ones they're not, but perhaps which ones that they are. And even small fragments. So this fragment of dishware is incredibly small, but it tells an important story because from an archaeological perspective, plates or any sort of dishware cups, if they have a pattern, if they have color, it indicates female presence in the camp. And there's quite a few can dumps throughout Rollins Pass. This is of calumet baking powder. But these types of cans help indicate what they might have eaten at the time. And it's really great to have documentation of these. I won't go into all of this just because it's boring for most, so I'm told, but the message in a bottle in terms of there are so many flowcharts that can be followed to determine how old a particular bottle is based on the shape of the shoulders and the color and what it's stamped with, etc. So as we slide further backwards into time, we're now kind of leaving the 1900s, moving into the 1800s. During this time period, Colorado becomes a state. In 1876. This is the time period we like to call Yclept Yankee Doodle. And we call it that based off of a newspaper article that says that there's a newly fledged town, Yclept, known as Yankee Doodle. And it has 3 cabins, 4 silver lodes. So they were doing quite a bit of mining operations here. Here's a look at what that area looked like so long ago. Basically very pristine. This is Yankee Doodle Lake. We showed a picture of it earlier on, and it had a road stretched around this lake. These are some rare stereograph cards that don't have that road there. I've merged them here as best as I could, just to give you a fuller screen view of it. There are quite a few prospect pits atop Gin Mountain and elsewhere, just looking for what types of mineral content were up there. And some mines as well. This is a mine that has basically collapsed. I stuck my camera in there and you can see the wood timbering holding up the walls still. But important clues, there was only one can at this mine, and it was a solder dot can, and because of the double solder dots, it indicates generally late 1880s. But that's the best way to date this particular portion, and it's good that someone had left that can there in order for us to find this time period. There's also another mine, and it holds pretty much the only word that we think is written on Rollins Pass, and that's the word danger. Pretty interesting right at the portal of that mine. So the town of Yankee Doodle, of course, had many reversals of fortune, especially as silver kind of faded in and out of a currency standard. We won't go into all of this, but there's quite a bit where reversals of fortune really did happen, and ultimately ending in 1904 when the railroad just completely overran this area. And in fact, you can see the railroad put their tracks right next to these cabins. There's also a gigantic fire that resulted in some deaths at Yankee Doodle in 1901. The fire was 40 square miles. And the destruction is evident in these old photographs of just kind of standing matchsticks in the forest. So the town of Yankee Doodle had quite a bit of incredible artifacts there that were unearthed by the U.S. Forest Service. Just exceptional bottles and everything, just in pretty pristine condition, given almost 150 years ago. They documented all of this in a really lengthy report. That's a lot of fun to dive into. And now we're kind of rolling a little bit further backwards through time, 1881 to 1867. This is kind of some earlier attempts to railroad over Rollins Pass. None of them were successful. They did change the landscape though a bit. Yankee Doodle Lake from above is here. There's now a bump of granite because they attempted to tunnel right through there. It's filled in with snow. We'll get a better look in a moment, but they're beginning to kind of change the landscape a bit. We talk about this in the book. I won't go into it here, but there's so many earlier railroading attempts that happened and just failed. It's hard to run rails over mountains. So there's a better look at the attempted tunnel near Yankee Doodle, and there were also other attempted tunnels here. Mother Nature's doing a good job of kind of reclaiming this.
So of course, before the iron horse, there was the actual horse. Brings us into the horse and wagon era, 1880 and forward. So similar to starting with David Moffat, we can't really start this era without bringing up John Quincy Adams Rollins, the man of which Rollins Pass got its name. This is a sketch of him that we were really happy to find at an old book at Carnegie in Boulder. Here's the census card for Mr. Rollins and his wife, showing them being residents of Gilpin County. And just a little bit about Mr. Rollins. He's been a really interesting character to research and just read about through articles. So we'll share some of those with you today. Reversals of fortune, that theme may have started with him. It's been incredible to see, how many financial gains and losses he had throughout his life. First starting with lumbering on the Mississippi. There are other kind of humorous reads. His financial struggles, I'll say. His reputation preceded him, so folks would kind of approach him on the street and say, "Hey, when are you going to pay me for this work?" And he'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'll pay you when I can." And they'd never met. He apparently also liked to engage in, you could say, like gambling activities. He engaged in a 32-hour-long game of billiards. This is a really great read in Lodo. It was just a spontaneous game where he and another man just picked up this game of billiards. It lasted 32 hours. A lot of the local businesses in Lodo shut down because they all wanted to come and watch what happened. and Mr. Rollins walked away with $11,000 at the end of the game. He had a lot of mineral patents covering Colorado. And of course, he was the brain behind the development of the wagon road and ultimately building that wagon road. You can see, and this can still be seen today on the left here, is cribbing that kind of went along this road to make it easier for the wagons to go over. And this photo on the right here, we were just amazed to find it's a very old photograph and rare photograph of wagons actually making their way up and over Gin Mountain, kind of coming to the summit at Corunna, what's now known as Corunna. Get a lot of questions about the toll structure. It really did depend, it seems, on how many were in the party. It could be anywhere from 5 cents to take the wagon road to like $2.50, depending on how many wagons were in the group and how many livestock they were bringing with them. We also get asked, what were the wagons carrying? Similar to trains, but this one is really who were carrying the wagons. So while the road was decent to be on horseback, when you put a wagon on this road, it was very challenging. So reading some of the articles, the families would need to take really everything out of the wagon and hand carry it up these cliff sides because it was just so bumpy, the wagon couldn't contain everything. As Travis mentioned, the Crawford family came to Steamboat. They were the first non-Indigenous family to take the Rollins Wagon Road. We also love seeing it was a 2-hour blizzard in June, which is typical. And the bumping was so hard that I thought I was nearly dead. This is a very old photograph, probably 1870s, that shows the switchbacks up Gin Mountain. And what's amazing is when you look at that route today, they're still very clearly defined. In researching Rollins, of course, we came across his obituary. No man in northern Colorado was better known nor counted more warm friends than John Q.A. Rollins. We also highlighted that in his 78th year, he left behind a widow and a young child. If you go down to Denver, kind of by Stock Show, Riverside Cemetery, that's where John Quincy Adams Rollins is buried along with his family.
And this is the time period when there's a lot of really good writings about the wagon journeys over Rollins Pass. Samuel Bowles captured perhaps the prettiest language in terms of talking about the reddest of painter's brush and the bluest of skies, and it was just really great to read his books as well as Rollins' own writings about the beauty that's up there on Rollins Pass. And there's one interesting newspaper article that really bridges the wagon era of Rollins Pass with the Native American era. And it was in 1873 in the Daily Rocky Mountain News. There were ads for wagons, much like there are for cars today. But Rollins himself wrote a letter to the editor, and he details very low rock walls, as well as a bow that he had found in a corner of a field. And what he had come across were the Native American presence that was quite vast on the pass. And so that brings us to 1850, which is probably the last date at which the Native Americans were on Rollins Pass, all the way through 8000 BC. So we have quite a bit of traveling backwards through time to do, but luckily we have a tour guide for this, and this is Dr. Jason LaBelle. He wrote the foreword to our book. We've been in the field with him doing archaeology work. He is an exceptional archaeology professor. He's president and past president of all sorts of archaeological societies in the state. His CV is very long, but he's really good at what he does and really distilling these the context down to bite-sized morsels that you really sink your teeth into and can't let go of. So he's written all sorts of comprehensive papers about the Native American systems on Rollins Pass, that they're internationally significant. Nowhere in the world do we find Native American game drives constructed in this way that are so expansive. So it's quite a gem. Each summer he takes his archaeology field school up to Rollins Pass to do a couple weeks of research out in the field. We've joined them on our days off. And they're an important group and we like to support them. So our first royalty check that we got for our book, we gave to them to to ensure that they could keep doing what they're doing, because they're really uncovering intricate layers of history. So these are Dr. LaBelle's slides that I've gotten permission to share. Archaeologists have recorded thousands of prehistoric sites above 3,000 meters in Colorado in three primary areas: the San Juans, the Grand Mesa, and then the Colorado Front Range, which is up here. If we dive a little bit into the Front Range, there's 96 hunting sites above 3,000 meters. And one of those, or many of them, are on Rollins. This is one in particular. This is the Olson site. And so this is a hand-constructed rock wall. And the concept is rather simple. If someone were to come into your living room and pour Legos down the floor, and you were barefoot, you wouldn't step on them. You would either go left or right. And the animals would do the same. They don't want to walk on the rocks. They'll go left or right. And either choice they make will end in disaster for them and dinner for the Native Americans. They will hide in the pits at the termination of these rock walls and ambush the animals. So how do we know how old they are? Well, there's two ways to date the evidence that exists on Rollins Pass. The first is lichenometric dating, and the second is radiocarbon dating, so stones versus bones. So we'll dive into stones first. So there is a really bright green lichen on these rocks. There's two colors of green, but the brightest of green is Rhizocarpone geographicum, and that grows at a predetermined rate each year. And anytime that rock is exposed to the air, that lichen will grow. And so we're able to determine the size of that lichen just based on how long that rock has been exposed. So when these rocks are turned in particular ways, that basically sets the clock. And radiocarbon dating. So bone preservation in alpine soil is really poor because that soil is so acidic. It is possible to find some bone up there, but all it does is help augment that story that's being told by the lichen. So Dr. LaBelle and his team map very small objects on Rollins Pass with pin flags, with sub-meter GPS, just trying to piece together this story. And occasionally they will find really incredible artifacts. And there's one in particular that they found a few years ago. It's an Allen point, so basically a spear point that's 9,000 years old. And it's from 7,000 BC. So if you're like me, your brain probably just rebooted because you had to shift from AD to BC and then go backwards that amount of time. So just to put this in context, let's go backwards through time. So something that we think of as really old, the Colosseum, it's less than 2,000 years old. And all of these things that we read about in history books, the Vikings and windmills, all of these happened in the last 2,000 years. And King Tut we think of as another benchmark that we like to rely on in terms of cementing ourselves with time. But 3,350 years ago, King Tut was ruling in Egypt from where we are today. But to go back to when that point was first created on Rollins Pass, we'll still need to go backwards more than 5,700 years ago. So pretty incredible. In fact, the pyramids are older than King Tut, and still all of these things, including woolly mammoths, all of these, were being created while that point was just sitting up there, including the invention of the wheel. So, and then we arrive at 7,000 BC when Dr. LaBelle's field school student, Brandon, found this point. And it's unique for a lot of reasons. It's fully intact, which is rare. It's above 12,000 feet, which is rare. And just the fact that it's an Allen point in this particular geographic area is also rare. So lots of rarities. And when we were talking about King Tut, the New York Times and many newspapers all around the world, when King Tut's tomb was first found, located, and then opened, it made the front page. But when an artifact more than 3 times King Tut's age was found, it didn't make any of the local papers.
And of course, there are more things to find than just that one Allen point. That's why Dr. LaBelle's team frequents Rollins Pass so often. And just on our hikes, we've probably hiked hundreds of miles now on Rollins Pass, and we'll find things of our own. What we do, because we have a great relationship with Dr. LaBelle, we'll take photographs. We hike with a sub-meter GPS to get the coordinates. If we have signal, we text him the picture, see if he wants it, and then we'll take the coordinates of where we hide it under a bush. Next time he's up on Rollins, he and his team go and collect it under their permit. So many of these are now in CSU's archaeology, not museum, that's the word, collection. There are other artifacts as well, of course, from the other eras, like railroad, wagon. Up here in the upper left is a glove, a leather glove that was found by a foundation. When flipped over, it looked like it was a new glove. It was perfectly supple. It was incredible, but the top was, blending into the landscape. Old shoe leather, pottery, can dumps, amethyst glass. Kind of find it all up there. There are also a few wrecks, as Travis mentioned. This one you can hike to very easily. And it's actually one that's documented in a book where Bollinger said, go and collect yourself a souvenir. Unfortunately, a lot of people might have followed that advice and got their own souvenirs and took a little bit of the history home with them. Looking back through photographs, there was 210. You can follow this animation here. Oh, did it? So 210, those numbers have been probably taken and they're at someone's home. Maybe the state sale, maybe the dump, who knows? Kind of on that theme, there's a lot of artifacts that have come and gone. You can see this can dump here on the left was quite large in the 70s, and then going to today, that's how it looks. I don't think that many have eroded. We've, talked with people who are collecting, just let them know that it's important to leave the history in place so you can kind of get a full picture, and the professionals can study the area. And U.S. Forest Service is actively involved in this as well. A lot of this falls under ARPA, so they're dedicated to protecting the area. And they even use, social media to let people know that they're dumping when they shouldn't be.
So why is it important to leave these artifacts in place? Because it gives archaeologists something to do in terms of creating magnificent overlays of where these particular points were found and the context that they bring. So many maps of pretty precise detail of all sorts of particular points. And what we're doing as well to help our friends in archaeology is basically creating an artifact database so that they don't need to always go into the field or rely on diverse points of input. We're consolidating all of these artifacts into a singular database that can be searchable so that they are able to just reference this one point. And this is something general public can get involved with as well, in terms of if you find something, no matter how large it is, if it's a trestle, we'll take that as well. General description, photographs, GPS points if you have them. If not, it's not a problem. Average length, width, height. And then leave those behind, because it really does help tell that story. Because once an artifact is removed, that context is lost forever. It can never be put back. And if it's on someone's mantle, it's probably never coming back to that particular spot. We kind of take our inspiration from that deadpan comedian Stephen Wright. He says, "I have the world's largest collection of seashells. I keep it on the beaches of the world." And that's kind of what we're trying to do here. We have the largest collection of Native American points. We keep them out on public lands. So that kind of concludes our point backwards through time, but what does the future look like? Well, it actually includes one more final step backwards through time to 11,000 years ago. Last summer, Kate and I came across a Scottsbluff projectile point. It's missing its tip, but this is enough of a complete picture for an archaeologist to say that this was the oldest human-made artifact ever found on Rollins Pass. And because it was left in place, this artifact has now been professionally collected and will be included in an upcoming master's thesis by a Colorado State University student. And just to give you an idea of just how old that is, it was created shortly after the last ice age. So Rollins Pass has 11,000 years of history. So in conclusion, if this was a resonant story for you, we will have touched on that Rollins Pass is a great gate. There were reversals of fortune, and that Rollins Pass has that enduring tapestry. So what does that mean nowadays? Well, a great gate. Support local historical associations and museums like the Tread of Pioneers Museum. They are our bridge to the past. When you walk through the halls, you're transported backwards through time. Reversals of fortune. You know, a lot of federal agencies, even states and universities have lost funding that they once enjoyed. So if you have the time and the ability, volunteer with those local agencies to help them through those reversals of fortune. And Rollins Pass is an enduring tapestry. So what does that mean? Support projects cementing the legacy of Rollins Pass and other mountain passes. They're really important to telling the story of what happened so long ago here in Colorado. And we also have imagery and are seeking imagery as well for the John Trezise archive. This is not imagery for us, this is imagery for the next generation. We pulled from so many different sources, so many museums and historical associations, and so many photographs are yellowed and curled and are being thrown out. So this is that repository to carry them forward into the future. And like Dr. Lavelle wrote in our foreword, that together we can piece together new chapters of the Rollins Pass story so that the next generation can enjoy them. And with that, thank you so much for coming out. Yes, sir.
In my 76 years, I've seen thousands of presentations, and this has to be the best, neat, cool, understandable, colorful presentation I have ever seen.
No.
I want to hire you. Because I have to make the presentation in October.
Oh, yeah.
Here at the museum. I want to learn.
You made me cry. Thank you.
I have paper flip charts from 1921. That's what I use. But I'm just so impressed, so impressed. Let me throw out some numbers to you. My great-great-uncle was the first white baby born in Denver in 1858. My great-great-grandfather was a mule skinner. He drove freight trains from St. Joe to Denver. So I've studied history a lot, and I want to throw out some numbers. It may be in your book, but I haven't read your book yet, so I don't know. The tunnel is 6.2 miles long, and before they built the tunnel, they built a pioneer tunnel, and the pioneer tunnel is 75 feet away. That's how Denver gets its water. The tunnel has 1,283 cubic feet per second water flowing from this side of the Continental Divide to the Denver side of the Continental Divide. The tunnel took 48 months to build. They did 21 feet per day. It cost them $475 per foot to build that tunnel. What else? 28 people died in the building of that tunnel. I went through the tunnel in 1952 because my mother ran away with me from San Francisco to Detroit, and we took the California Zephyr, and I was only 9 years old at the time. I don't remember the tunnel. I kind of remember the trip, but I think it's fascinating to learn about why the tunnel exists today, who goes through it. The California Zephyr goes through it, and many people will sign up for the Amtrak train ride from Denver to San Francisco and return. And the trip is timed so that you enter in the Rocky Mountains during the day. The funniest story about that, I was rafting the Colorado River, and when the California Zephyr went by, a family, mother, father, and 3 children, mooned the train. If you raft the Colorado River, it's required to moon the train. I don't have any pictures. I should get down to the Colorado River and get some mooning pictures to prove that. Thank you so very much for a wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How do you determine when some of these pieces of artifact were made, the history behind it? How do you determine that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's one that we have as well in terms of, sorry. It's a really good question, and one that, a question we ask as well. A lot of the workmanship, particular notchings, the way there might be slopes on rock artifacts is a good indicator of changing technology. It's kind of the same way that we can look at a car and know that that was made in the 90s versus a late model car. Kind of the same thing with these particular points. They have distinct workmanship that is exclusive to that era. Yes, ma'am.
Is Rollins Pass paved now? I mean, can we go on it?
You can go on it. It's not paved. It's still very bumpy. It's smoother on the west side, on the Winter Park side, than it is on the Rollinsville side. But it's quite bumpy, and it is a dead end at the summit.
From the west?
From the west and from the east. It's dead ended at the top.
Can't do the whole thing anymore.
Correct.
Why?
Because of the accident in the tunnel in 1990, that it's quite expensive to repair.
And can you go through the Moffett Tunnel today?
Yes. Yeah, on the. Yeah, you can do it through the California Zephyr or the ski train that goes from Denver to Winter Park Resort a couple months in the winter. Yeah, they go through the tunnel, so it's a lot of fun. Yes, ma'am.
Why were there so many Swedes that were killed? Why were they here?
Yeah.
Did they have certain skills, or?
I'm not sure. It's something we haven't really been able to find. There were definitely a lot of nationalities that worked on Rollins Pass. A lot of. Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, the answer is,
Nice.
Nice. Here we go.
Thank you.
I'm an expert on tie hackers. So the railroad needed railroad ties to build the railroad, and they needed trees to be cut down. So they went to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and they wanted families to move to Colorado to cut down trees because they were used to living in cold climates. So they would get 25 families, men, women, and children. They would build a housing project in the middle of nowhere. My curiosity was piqued when I hiked north of Columbine and about 30 miles and came across a subdivision of cabins. Why on earth would you build a subdivision of cabins in the middle of nowhere? That was the railroad. The railroads built those cabins, brought those 25 families over, and they did this all over Wyoming and Colorado. You had one assignment: cut down 1 million trees by May. In Colorado, you would cut down the tree and someone else would cut the branches off. You would brand the tree, and the tree would be dragged to river's edge waiting for the May high water. In Wyoming, they built flumes from the railroad up into the mountains, 8 or 9 miles. You would cut down the tree and you would make the railroad tie yourself with a broad axe. You were paid $2.50. You made $12 a week, $600 a year. And so the nationalities were here because of the snow, the cold weather. You needed people. You don't want people from Florida. You don't want people from Louisiana. You don't want people from warm climates. You want people who grew up in cold weather, know how to dress, know how to make clothing, know how to live.
Makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
No other comments?
Yes, sir.
Random question. I was just thinking about Berthoud Pass and wondering about the timeline. When Rollins Pass was made, was Berthoud not even there?
Berthoud was there. They were actually kind of competing passes for wagon routes. So there's kind of a big dispute throughout the newspapers of that era on Rollins Pass versus Berthoud Pass, and Berthoud Pass ultimately won out as the preferred wagon route. Probably because the Crawford's bad review of the pass. But yeah, and then ultimately Berthoud was paved, and it is, the story continues. Yes, sir.
The better way to go is down through Pueblo. And the people in Pueblo lobbied the state legislature to build a railroad going west through Pueblo. Thank heavens, Pueblo had a big flood. The flood was so bad that it was determined we'll never build a railroad through Pueblo. And that's how Moffett won the state legislature. The state legislature put up $6 million, but the cost overrun was $23 million.
Thank you, you guys. That was. Thank you so much.